Molly Binetti, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on again.
Rob, I appreciate it. I've got to actually take a second. I remember when I first started out in this field as a student and I was in college, your podcast was one of my go-tos for content early on in my career. So kind of seeing this come full circle is a pretty cool moment for me to be on here as a guest. So I appreciate it. I really do.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. And I say again, not that you've been on the podcast before, but we have spoken before when you're on the mastermind with Neil and Daniel on the change direction mastermind. So thank you for coming back on.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the focus of the chat for the next 45 minutes to an hour. But anyone that doesn't know who you are, we didn't really go into too much of a background and introduction on the mastermind because we're short on time. But just to get a bit of a background on you would be great.
Absolutely. So I'm a college strength and conditioning coach by trade, and this is my ninth full-time year in the college environment. And I basically got my start as a freshman in college, and I had no idea that strength and conditioning even existed. But I was really lucky enough to cross paths with the head strength coach at my university at Marquette and Todd Smith, and he opened his doors to me right off the bat, just if I wanted to explore and get curious about what he did. And I just kept showing up day after day and year by year. And so this is really my 12th overall year in Division I college athletics. But along the way, I've had a lot of stops in high school, in the private sector. I spent some time down at Exos in Phoenix, formerly Athletes Performance. And, throughout my career, I've really worked with a multitude of athletes ranging from 6 years old, high school, college, professional Olympians, general population, and have really been exposed to a lot of different things. But really these last 4 years in particular have really dived deep into the basketball world and have spent the last 4 years at University of South Carolina and exploring the basketball only route. And, I'm fortunate enough to do that at one of the best programs in the country and work for a head coach who is the best in the game. And so I've really kind of found a unique route and have a pretty unique role in terms of what I'm able to do in the college environment. So I've been a lot of different places. This is my third, I guess, major university that I've worked in my career, and really happy with where I'm at, and have found, throughout the course of my career that the concept of movement, change of direction, agility, all of those things has really been a topic that I've grown a passion for. And so I'm excited to talk with you about that today and kind of feed off of what we already discussed on the mastermind a couple months ago.
Absolutely. I can't let the opportunity go to ask you about working with General Pop. And it's something that has come up quite a few times in the podcast. And it's something that gets potentially looked down upon, whether you're a personal trainer, like strength and conditioning coaches that have grown up working with General Pop. How much of an influence has that had on you moving forward into the collegiate setting and further on in your career?
Yeah, it provided me with, I think, a skill set that you might not think of when it comes to being a coach. And it's almost less from the training side of things and more from just the people side of things. And you really, working with a diverse range of people like that, you really learn, the lights went out on me. You really learn how to talk to and relate to and connect with a range of people. And, with general population too, it ranges. Some of them are athletes in their own right, and whether that's different leagues they're participating in, or maybe they're still playing sports in some area, or you've got the 40 plus year old woman who's just trying to look to get back in shape, or you've got just the kind of the average Joe at the gym. Like, you've got to figure out what these people want at the heart of it, and also find ways to connect with them and make what you do meaningful to them. And so I think it's been really helpful just in terms of the coaching side of things. And also too, it really, I think, also helps simplify what we do. We can get really caught up, especially when we work with elite level, athletes, we can get kind of caught up in the weeds of really fancy and advanced training methods. And I think working with that population gives you, kind of puts back in perspective what's really important in terms of achieving whatever goal it is, and also too, how to talk to people that are very different from you. And I think overall that just makes you a better coach, and that makes you more relatable, and also I think it just helps you be a better communicator.
Absolutely agree. And like I say, it's come up quite a few times, so I couldn't let that opportunity go to reaffirm my biases that this is that it is super super important for any coach to get in front of general pop and the sales tactics as well to sell your message, to sell your methods to someone that fitness and exercise isn't potentially something that is within their lifestyle or hasn't been their lifestyle up until now. So great call.
I think Rob, I think you actually made a really good point there, and I didn't touch on that, but I think like you said, at the heart of it too, what we do is we have to sell. We have to sell what we do. We have to, I think it gets a negative connotation, but we have to manipulate in a sense, and we've got to, find a way to make what we do appealing and make them understand that they need it. And so thanks for saying that too, because that's a huge part of it, and that's kind of the aspect that none of us really like to talk about sometimes. Yeah,
it is. I mean, when people say sales, they think of like door-to-door selling of windows or
sleazy
cars.
Car salesmen.
Yeah, sleazy, dodgy guys. Yeah, on forecourts. But yeah, absolutely not. And I think it's to have that as a skill. And again, it comes down to communication. So good topic. I like it. So one thing we discussed on the mastermind was testing options for change direction performance. And I think you kicked us off with probably an answer that I didn't particularly expect. And then that reverberated around Daniel and Neil going, yeah, I kind of think the same as well, which was the fact that you don't test loads when it comes to change direction. So I'd just love to get your thoughts on how we understand change direction performance and testing options that we do have, and then your views on that topic as a whole.
Yeah, that's definitely something. Oh, and we're back with the lights. Here we go. And that's definitely something that's changed for me over the course of my career in terms of shying away from truly testing a change of direction or using a change of direction test. And, I think one thing we talked about on the mastermind too that I really liked how Neil broke it down is, when we look at what are the key determinants of a good change of direction performance. You've got your physical capacities, right? So how strong they are, how powerful they are, how explosive they are. And you can measure that and test that a multitude of ways in the weight room through obviously strength testing, jump profiling. You can look at ground contact times. You can look at reactive strength, rate of force development. And even just looking at those physical capacities alone are going to give you a pretty good idea of this athlete's capabilities and what they might look like in terms of changing directions. Because if you look at those metrics and they're shit, chances are they're probably not a great mover either. Then you look at the technical aspects of it. What does their center of mass look like? What does their foot placement look like? What's their trunk doing? What's their pelvis doing? What kind of angles are they creating? And those are things that I've learned more to assess every single day in what we do, just by throwing them into an environment where they've got to move and throwing a lot of open drills at them, honestly, right off the bat, because that gives me a lot of valuable information about what they look like before I even really break things down or break drills down and teach technique. I want to see what they look like just in an organic environment first. And then, the third component of that is that agility and task-specific aspect of it and adding the cognitive effects of that as well, too. So, I kind of break it down and, figuring out how you can assess each of those pieces. And I've just found that, my best measure, or I guess my best assessment of their ability to move is through just the basic strength and kind of jump profiling that we do in the weight room, as well as I'm watching them in practice every single day and seeing what their movement looks like. And I'm talking with our coaches about how they move and how they see them move, as well as every single day in our prep work. I think we take a little bit different approach to it because typically in strength and conditioning, especially in the college sector, when we talk about teaching movement, it's done in a very controlled manner with very few fluctuations. And that used to be me too when I would teach change of direction and movement and all of that. But I've really kind of shied away from that. And I really like to incorporate a lot of gameplay and problem solving activities within our warm-ups. And that gives me a lot of valuable information about how they move as well. And then I can regress if I need to in terms of really teaching technique and using the warm-up period to incorporate some of those more closed drills, lateral movements, acceleration, deceleration, a lot of different, hip turns, rotational movements, and just incorporating those every single day to get small exposures to it. But I really have just found that, doing a change of direction test, like a 505, pro agility doesn't really give me any information. And I found that just because they get better at that test doesn't mean that their actual movement performance is getting better in the place that it matters most, which is on the basketball court. And so we know that sport is chaos and it involves so many different components. And so if I can get a pretty accurate idea through the testing that we're doing in the weight room, talking with our sport coaches and watching them in practice and in games, I can really figure out where their deficiency is. Is it a physical capability? Is it technical? Is it tactical? Or is it cognitive? And then from there, I can really figure out, okay, where do we need to spend some time from a movement side of things? And so I think I don't want to test something just so they can get better at the test. And I can get enough information through what we do, especially on the jump side of things, that I can get a pretty good idea of what their capabilities are.
Can we dive a little bit deeper into the testing itself?
Yeah.
Just give us, and then what would be quite nice would be to link what you do in the jump testing with the intricacies of what you actually want to achieve in the change direction ability as well. Like, I don't know, rate of force development, we look to that because it links with that, for example. Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're pretty fancy over here. I use a just jump mat to do the majority of our testing. I will say we've got force plates on the way, and I'm pretty excited about that. But I will say you don't need a lot. You don't need a force plate, and you don't need a lot of fancy equipment to measure some of these qualities, especially in this team type of environment where everything is so applied. I don't need to get in the weeds of some of that technology. So I'll go through a pretty thorough jump profile with them. We will do a series of drop jumps, both double leg and single leg. I will do a basic counter movement jump with arm swing. I'll do that single leg as well. Both off one leg, land on one leg, and off one leg, land on two legs, where they're just worried about pure force and takeoff and not worrying about having to land on one as well. I'll do a repeat 4 test. I'll use that as well to look at jump height. So it would give me the average of the 4 jumps as well as their ground contact times. And then something that we've just started to do recently is that same 4 jump, both on right leg and left leg. So I can look at their reactivity right to left and see what those differences are. And so from all of those tests, I can get a pretty good idea of are they strong? Are they powerful? Are they explosive? What's their reactive strength like? And then from there, I can really hone in on what that athlete needs. And what I've found, to be honest, is that especially for the first couple years that I get an athlete here, most of the time they just need to train consistently and all of those qualities are going to improve. And then it's really once we have an athlete that's been in our program for 2-3 years is when some of those real specific differences start to come into play of how is that information being used to really individualize training. Is this an athlete that jumps slow but jumps high? Okay, I know I need to focus our time on creating a little bit faster stretch shortening cycle. Does this athlete have a really significant right to left deficiency? Okay, let's try to close the gap there. And then also, is that showing up in what we're seeing on the court as well? And so just taking that information and really trying to, I'm in a position where we have 16 athletes and it's just me. That's my only team. And so I get to really train them all day long, essentially. And I can really break down player by player and focus on what they need, as opposed to being in a big team setting where everybody's got a pretty similar program and we've got small tweaks here and there. And so it's really dependent on the developmental level of the athlete, where they're at in terms of what I'm focusing on. And then also, where does that deficiency lie? And then how can we figure out where the, lowest hanging fruit is in terms of creating a more robust, more adaptable, better moving athlete?
You're absolutely killing us here, giving all the secrets that it's actually just consistent training.
It's crazy.
You're killing us.
It is crazy. And, it's crazy. We have obviously, a pretty good basketball team, and we have some of the best players in the country, and you get them in, and most of them have never trained before too. So, take me out of the equation. They're still going to be great at basketball, but when you get some solid, consistent training under their belts, it's pretty amazing what can happen, right?
If you were less further along in your career, so if you were a younger coach, and you mentioned a lot about watching the girls in action, so watching the girls in the court and trying to get an understanding of what they're like in a chaotic environment. That's great because you know exactly what you're looking for. You're 12 years in, you've honed your skill of watching girls, how they move, what they need, tweaks you can make. If you were at the younger end of your career, if you were 1-2 years in, would you try to do that and that analysis of movement in a testing, more closed environment, maybe a testing session versus on the court? I'm just trying to second guess the people who are listening who may be younger in their career and going, that's great, Molly, but like, what do I look for? Like, I know a few little pointers that I could pick up on, but things move so fast. Things, the chaotic environment, I'm trying to reduce that down to get your opinion on for those kind of coaches that are listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is still value in that. And as a young coach, I almost feel like I had to go through that process and do those things early on in my career to now see the other side of things and to be able to evolve that process. But I think there is absolutely value in measuring some close change of direction drills. I find it hard to have like a true agility test of any sort, but I think whatever cone drill, or maybe it's a pro agility 505, whatever it might be, I think there's value in getting really good at understanding how to look at those tests, and also just introducing your athletes, especially when you're early on in your career and you're still learning what good movement looks like. You're still learning about technique, and you're learning about, what are the foundations of movement, regardless of environment. I think there's a lot of value in the more you are exposed to those things and you're exposing your athletes to it, the more you're going to learn, and you're going to pick up on a lot of the subtleties of it where you can really get nuanced with it down the line. So as a young coach, absolutely, you've got to know how to teach movement in a closed environment first. Like, you've got to know the ins and outs of that. And I think when you become an expert on that, that also allows you to kind of see things through a different lens and evolve that. And when you watch them in their natural habitat over time, again, that's where you develop kind of that feel for it. And there is a sense of intuitiveness about it, but that doesn't come without first having those foundations of movement skills. And whatever the test or the drills might be, it doesn't even really matter as long as there's some consistency to it and you're continuing to kind of hone in on those skills and that craft over time.
And that plays into your comment about going open relatively early when the girls come into your setting because of that exact situation.
Yeah. Once you know that, then and you watch them move, and I think that's a huge change that I've made, is exposing them to open movement or open drills right off the bat and getting them into a kind of a hectic or chaotic environment and just seeing what they do naturally, or just, telling them to do something without coaching them up at all and giving them zero cues, watch them move without thinking. And then you can really figure out, okay, what's the one, maybe two at most important cues that they need to organize into a position that we want. And again, that comes with first knowing what you're looking for, and you've got to kind of go through those steps first.
Would there be any time at all that you would go close to open and go the other way around at this point in your career right now?
Yeah, I would say probably more so in the rehab setting.
Okay. Yep.
Regardless of injury, I think there's, I look back at from a testing standpoint too, that's a situation where I would do some closed change of direction type tests. Again, doesn't even matter which one it is, but definitely in that environment, I want to expose them to some more closed drills. But I'm also a big believer through the rehab process of movement variability right off the bat. And instead of just, and I think that's a key tenet of, I guess philosophy is the best word, is creating a learning environment that is focused on movement variability as opposed to movement repetition. And so while certain exercises or drills might be closed in nature, still providing variability within that. I use a lot of repetition without repetition. And so they know exactly, the drill is closed, they know the distance they're going, they know where they're stopping, they know all of those factors, and they have a certain amount of repetitions, but each one's got to look a little bit different. So while it's still closed, it's still providing some room for some creativity and some decision making. And, as we know, movement is really complex, and no two movements look the same, and there's no cookie cutter technique or approach to it. So yeah, definitely there's value in that. I use that mostly in the rehab setting. And I still think, maybe if you've got a pretty young or inexperienced athlete, it's not always a bad thing to start closed and go to open. I think just for my preference, I found it easier to teach, and also sometimes you get an athlete overthinking when you're trying to cue them too much and having them kind of perform movements in a way that's trying to almost fit them into a box.
Is there any other places in the program where that part of your philosophy kind of comes into its own, the repetition without repetition?
Yeah, and so I would say every day there's an aspect of it, and
okay.
That varies from, an example would be, let's say we're working on drop jumps, or we're working on landings. They might have a certain amount of repetitions, but each one's got to look different or be in a different position. And so that might look like, dropping off the box with 2 feet, dropping off the box and you're turning 90 degrees and landing, 180 degrees, 2 legs to 1 leg. And I give them I give them a little bit of structure, but I kind of let them have some creativity with it. That same would hold true for different jumps, hops, bounds, giving them some constraints and then saying, no 2 reps can look the same. Even so, from a lunge perspective, med ball throws, med ball slams, there's a lot of different ways you can incorporate it, but I really like it from a movement, power, plyometric type of, in that setting of really teaching movement in a variable way, and also providing some constraints within that to make them make decisions, and also provide some external factors that they've got to account for as well.
One thing that I think is an interesting topic that fits probably right in here is doing all the things that you've mentioned about the using open drills versus closed drills. How many girls do you have on the team? 15?
16 this year. Yeah.
16. Okay,
yeah.
So I suppose that's a reasonable medium-sized number. There were people working with 2s and 3s, and there are people working with 50s and 60s probably. But it's still a lot going on if all these girls are training at the same time and you're maybe on your own with one other person potentially, and you're managing this group, trying to improve each one individually based on the stuff that we've just said. Is there any tips and techniques that you could share that allows you to allow the girls to get the work in, but gives you the opportunity to coach and refine individual technique, even though there's 16 girls working simultaneously?
Yeah, I give so much credit to people that work with large groups, first off. I did that early in my career too, and it's really impressive, the organization and structure. And I think one thing that really helps is even in a large group setting, I really like the concept of breaking it down either by maybe it's stations, or, if we're working on one particular skill, you're only having a certain number of athletes work at a time, so you can give them some specific feedback and you can see them all as they work. And also, I think one of the really important aspects that I try to take too is the education and the teaching piece of my athletes too, where they also become coaches and understand what we're looking for. And I think if you can create an environment too where you've got other athletes coaching other athletes, that also gives you more leverage as a coach and allows for more things to be happening at once, where you can keep an eye on more people. But I think what I found, obviously in my setting, I try to bring them in small groups, and typically we're in, maybe 4 to 6 in a group at a time. And that allows me, I can keep my eyes on everybody at the same time, but we still will put them in situations where they're either partnered up, or they're, if it's a certain movement that we're doing, it's maybe 1 or 2 athletes going at a time. And I think one of the biggest things that as I try to create an environment and put constraints on the task where they're kind of self-organizing and figuring out how to solve problems and get into the right positions without much coaching from me. And I think something that's evolved over time is I used to coach way too much, especially when it came to movement and things like that, because it is such a, there's something to be said about just smoothness of movement, natural movement. And I just found that I was over cueing, over coaching, and really I have just tried to create drills and create an environment where they're figuring things out on their own, and they know what a good rep feels like, and they know what a bad rep feels like, and they know what the position that they're supposed to be in feels like, and vice versa. And so, I guess, in tips, is try to break them down in as smaller groups as possible, even if you've got, multiple things going on at once, but simplify your cueing. Pick, maybe it's the one thing that you're focusing on for that day, the one postural element or physical element, and then that will help you coach multiple athletes at the same time. If you're trying to coach 8 different things, it gets really hard, and to provide feedback and to also, allow for that athlete to really take in that feedback and make adjustments.
Is there any examples that you can give us around creating those constraints to get what you want, so you don't have to do what you say, which is overcoach and overcue and probably get super frustrated?
Yeah. I think one thing that has really helped keep the posture, and I think about our lateral movement, and when we don't do, I'll say this, the only real change of direction or agility work that we do is within our actual training sessions in the weight room. We actually don't, we don't have speed or agility sessions out on the court. I just incorporate movement into every part of what we do in the weight room. And I think one thing that I've really found to help create posture, the posture that we want when it comes to lateral movement, is adding like an upper body driver or like a plate punch or a load that an athlete is holding at the chest when performing something like a lateral bound. A lateral bound with a plate punch really helps keep the chest up and out that you want. It also provides them with that forward lean and that ability to load and kind of keep that angle that you want to push back. And that would be a specific one that I found to be really, really helpful in terms of cleaning up what can sometimes be a messy movement, just teaching a lateral bound. There's obviously a huge stability component to that as well too, but being able to really stick the landing, control the torso, keep the chest up, and also create the low angles that we want to direct force laterally. That's one that I've found really helps clean that up from every level of athlete, from novice all the way through. I look at my freshmen versus my seniors.
Just changing this from a change direction conversation to the agility side, obviously including the cognitive element. At what point, or is it all the time, that there is a decision-making element within the sessions that you run from a movement? I can't say it without saying it, but change direction agility session?
Yeah. And the reason we don't do a lot of movement work like that is because they are in practice all year round, and they're playing basketball all year round. And we take a little bit different approaches. We don't usually have individual sessions where, they might just be working on skill work, ball handling, passing, shooting, things like that. And we're in integrated full team practices where it's live play all year round. And so they get that all the time. And so, but one aspect that we will do, and I may have mentioned this earlier, is every warm-up we include some sort of gameplay or problem-solving activity. And that can range from, even if we're in small groups, today we had groups in, and, we had 2 to 3 athletes competing against each other, teams of 2 or 3. And we had a kind of a unique type ball, and we have some turf space. So, they could dribble 3 times, take 3 steps, or they had 3 seconds to get rid of the ball, and they're trying to evade each other and basically play a combination of football, handball, ultimate. We'll include games like that where there's decision making, there's agility within that itself. We will add components to, I'll think of even our jump training, where they've got to jump and they've got either a teammate or 2 that are moving in on them in some direction, and they've got to figure out how to land around them or between them, and then they've got to make a movement around them. Or we'll add things where they've got to jump off a box, and then they've got to make a one movement around some sort of, like, maybe it's a screen, maybe it's another teammate, or there's something that they've got to evade. And so just trying to find little ways to include some different aspects of time, of perturbation, and decision making within, simple things such as jumps, I found goes a long way too, just in developing a pretty adaptable athlete.
I love seeing collegiate athletes and professional athletes during warm-ups playing games that isn't their game. So, I don't know, over here we've got cricket players who traditionally play football, play soccer before they play cricket as a warm-up. What is the best example of a warm-up game that you would do with your girls that they absolutely love that's got nothing to do with basketball?
Yeah. We've done kickball before. Like, anything with their feet, I think is always hilarious. But one staple game that I've used, and I actually picked this up, I might have picked it up when I was in college, but it's trash ball. And it's essentially, we'll play it on the turf, we'll play it on the court, but essentially you've got two big trash bins. And I like to play with, we'll use, sometimes we'll use a football, sometimes we'll use a soccer ball. Sometimes we'll use just strange objects, anything other than, sometimes we'll use a tennis ball. I actually really like the tennis ball, and our players really love that, just from a hand-eye coordination. But it's very similar where you've got a team, let's say we're a full team, so it's 8 versus 8. You've got 3 steps with the ball, or you've got to give it up after 3 seconds. And you've got, they're playing defense on each other. It's a kind of a combination, again, of like ultimate frisbee, handball, all of that. But that's one that they absolutely, and like, we've got a competitive team, and that's what I love about incorporating games right off the bat, is the engagement level automatically goes through the roof. And we've got a population that doesn't inherently love the weight room or love to train, but you get them playing a game in the first 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, like, their moods change, they're moving, they're sweating, and they're ready to go. So trash ball is a key one. And then we'll do a lot of stuff with tennis balls, and like reactive tennis ball games, like throwing the ball off the wall and doing some different competitions. And they tend to really gravitate towards that a lot.
I don't know if it was on your Instagram the other day. I don't think it was. But there was a cool game that I saw. There was like people in pairs. I don't know if it was. I think it was a mixed group actually. And there was a cone in the middle. They were in like an athletic position, like ready to get the cone, and then to touch the head, touch the hips, and then dive for the cone. And you could just see that the intensity was absolutely through the roof, because obviously the competitive streak for these guys and girls just off the charts. Yeah, I thought it was cool. I love stuff like that. It's great.
Yeah, I think we've done something similar. But like you said, there's always some aspect of just fun and game to what we do, and there's also some element of competition every single day. That's something that can be trained. But I've also found too, when it comes to a movement standpoint, a speed standpoint, jump training, whatever it is, when you add an element of competition, they're not only competing with themselves, they're competing with each other, but you get to really see their true capabilities. And I found too, from a movement skill standpoint, you get to really see them in their kind of natural element as they compete, because they're not thinking about what they're doing, they're trying to win. And so it's not always, I think, it's not always pretty, and pretty movement isn't always, I think you just had somebody on your podcast and they said like pretty movement isn't always the fastest, or something along those lines. And I found that couldn't be more true. But those elements, I found like it increases the engagement, the excitement, the willingness to train, desire to train. So it's a huge component for us. And it develops a lot of athletic skills too. Like what it checks a lot of boxes.
Absolutely. Have you always coached girls, Molly?
Mostly, yeah. Okay. But there have been times throughout my career, when I think back to the time I spent in high school, I coached a lot of male athletes, I would say majority male athletes at the high school level. And even going back to my time at Exos, there was a range of males as well. I worked with MLB players. I got to work with some Olympic athletes, some sprinters and things like that. And then as I ventured into my first job at Purdue, I worked with 7 or 8 different teams there as well, both men and women. And then as I kind of progressed in my career, I transitioned after a year, and I worked at Louisville for 4 years. And the teams that I primarily had were all female athletes, but I did get opportunities to kind of jump in with male teams as well. And then obviously I've been, working with women basketball players the last 4 years. So majority of my time has been with women, which I absolutely love, but I have had some exposure.
If you were to coach a men's basketball team, for example, use that as an obvious one, would there be any differences that you would incorporate into your change direction agility sessions or thought process or philosophy that would be different to what you do with your girls?
I wouldn't say there's huge fundamental differences from training selection standpoint, exercise selection. I think there's definitely considerations that we've got to account for on the female side. Obviously, just the structural integrity of joints and ligaments. Understanding differences that our bodies go through during a menstrual cycle, and understanding ways to account for that and be aware of that, and understanding there's times where joint laxity is increased, and understanding in general where the deficiencies lie. I see a big difference in terms of strength when our women come in and just generally weak. They generally lack motor control. Posterior chain strength is a huge concern. And not saying that's not prevalent on the men's side too, but it's definitely more of a factor. And I think there's a lot of, I'd say the biggest differences probably lie on more of the psychosocial, psycho-emotional aspects of the training environment that I try to create for our women, that you don't maybe necessarily have to account for on the men's side as well. And I think there's just a general, probably different, and I can't say this as a blanket statement, but a general difference in the goal of training on the men's side. A lot of times it is for size and strength, whereas that is not probably our primary focus on our side. So yeah, there's differences, but from a fundamental, training is training, and there's a lot of things that I would do almost identical to what I do now, but there's definitely other considerations that maybe don't necessarily relate to the actual training program itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the menstrual cycle and dealing with the effects of that with your group, how do you go about tracking it? What individual changes do you potentially make at different stages of that cycle? And again, that sounds relatively manageable when it's 1 or 2, but when it's 16, it becomes, obviously there's lots of moving parts there.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, this is an area that I'm still figuring out. Even as a female, it hasn't been until the past couple of years that I've really even taken this into account, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface, and there's so much that I don't know or do enough of with our athletes. But I think for starters, just being able to, like you said, track when their cycles are, and understanding who's on birth control and who's not, and understanding what different side effects are, and understanding how the cycle affects some of our players literally can't get out of bed for an entire day or two, and just understanding how it affects each person. I think that was kind of the starting point, and just understanding, for me, I have notes, and I have reminders on my phone, and I obviously have conversations with our athletes too, so I kind of know when this is coming. And I think a key tenet of our program too is autonomy. And I really try to do a lot on the front end of involving them in on the process of what we're doing, how things feel for them. And so when it comes to be those times, giving them some choices and some options of what we're doing from a training standpoint that day. Because in general, there's going to be times where they're more apt to respond better to some intensity and things like that. And there's going to be times where they need to chill a little bit, and they need to probably maybe hit a little bit more volume, but a little bit lower intensity, and giving them some choice of what makes them feel best, and also just trying to educate them along the process and let them know that kind of what they're experiencing and going through is completely normal. And also just even small tweaks in those programs based on how they're feeling goes so far into them trusting you, buying in, and really feeling like you're making decisions that are in their best interest. So I still don't have a full grasp of some of the science behind all of it, but those are some small tweaks that we've made and will continue to make going forward. But obviously when it comes to competition and things like that, like we can't reschedule when our games are, if our whole team, you got to play the game. But when it comes to what stress I'm providing and putting on them, there's always ways for me to adjust.
Is there any particular resources that you would recommend that you've potentially used to help your understanding of this area that you could share?
Yeah, honestly, my best resource is my friend Sam Moore. She's the one that does all the research and is putting out research, doing research, and she has a wealth of knowledge in this area. And that's honestly been someone that I've really learned what I have from. But in terms of like actual research and things like that, I don't have specific articles, but I just through conversations with other people, and she's one that I know like really she's doing something that nobody else is doing. And so that's a huge resource, for anybody that's looking to learn more about it, and couldn't recommend her enough.
And on the psychosocial side of things and how that may differ from when coaching guys, any particular nuances that you can share that potentially worked for you when working with girls?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this is a rabbit hole we could go down pretty deep and far in many directions. But I think, I've got such a unique opportunity to work with, 18 to 22 year olds. That's some of the most formidable times of your life right there. Like you are literally maturing and growing and developing at such a fast rate. And so it's a really unique time to help them build awareness, to build courage and confidence, to help them, there's always, you're fighting body image issues, especially in the age of social media and Instagram models and fitness models. And, the perceptions of what lifting weights will do to their bodies and making them bulky or this and that, or looking like a guy, and, fighting those things. And, it's a unique time too, where, I'm obviously helping them develop on the physical side, but I also get to help them develop into really strong, badass women. And so I really take seriously the environment that I'm creating in terms of making it an inclusive environment, setting the bar high to challenge them and get outside their comfort zone, and to be comfortable taking risks, and to be comfortable, maybe looking stupid or failing, trying something and not being able to do it, and getting really, really comfortable with failure, and just having the courage to try things, and just helping them own who they are as a person, but helping them own their bodies as well too, and what their bodies can do, and really show them what their bodies can do. But when I think of the training environment too, it's one where I really try to kind of follow the tenets of the self-determination theory of creating an environment where they feel competent, so they feel like they're good at what they're doing, they feel like they're strong, they feel like they understand what we're doing. An environment that creates a lot of connection with me as a coach, but also them to their teammates, and where they feel like they are supported and like they belong, and again they fit in and they're supposed to be there. And then also that piece of autonomy of giving them a voice. And but like for a long time in this world, women didn't have a voice, and I think women are still finding their voice and being comfortable using their voice and having opinions and being able to make decisions and have authority, and really giving them opportunities to have that in the weight room, and ask for their opinions and ask for their input, and have them really just be involved in that process and really see what they're capable of. I think that's probably my favorite part of my job, are all those factors. Obviously I love training, but it's definitely a pretty unique opportunity to kind of design an environment that is fun. They're able to really stretch themselves and see what they can do, both physically, mentally, emotionally. And it's that kind of that balance between, push and pull, giving them high things high standards to meet, but also meeting them where they're at, accepting them for who they are as individuals, and helping them grow and develop throughout the course of, their careers here, however long that might be.
The passion comes across, Molly. It's absolutely great. Love it. It's great to hear. Great to see. One thing that we spoke about in the mastermind was developing change direction qualities in the gym. And we've kind of touched on it, but it'd be good to go a little bit deeper. And one thing that you spoke about and the rest that the two guys spoke about was isometric training and eccentric training, and the potential link, or the link, between that and improving change direction qualities. Would you be able to give us a bit of an insight into how you link the two? Again, we have touched on it a little bit, but potentially go a little bit deeper in how that does link and how you do link it programming wise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe it was Daniel that talked about, reverse engineering the sport as well too. So when I look at basketball and I look at the data that we get, in any given practice or game, the number of high intensity accelerations, decelerations, changes of direction are upwards of, hundreds, if not thousands of changes of direction in a single session. So if you look at that repeated day after day and throughout the course of an entire season or an entire year, their ability to absorb force has got to be really high. And so when I look at the most important buckets for us to fill on the weight room side of things, and from a developmental standpoint, we spend majority of our time in the off season on eccentric and isometric strength, specifically when it comes to the lower body. And we spend majority of our time on, deceleration and landing. And we do that in a multitude of ways. And there's really a small percentage of the time that we spend training on true like concentric strength and concentric power output. And that time spent in those training phases definitely differs based on developmental level of the athletes, if they're a first year, second year, third or fourth year athlete. And again, through, assessing them and seeing where they're at throughout and knowing them so well, you kind of know what buckets you need to fill at different times of the year. But we spend a very good amount of time on eccentric training, both bilaterally, unilaterally, and that's a key tenet for us. And I would say that, the time spent in that over, the course of a 4-year career here definitely shortens. Our seniors, most of our seniors and, even some of our juniors are spending, far less time, but we do always come back to it, revisit it, and hit that for a period of time to develop that quality. And then, based on where they're at and what they need most, we'll transition in or out. But that is absolutely huge just for the amount of stress that they undergo, the amount of times they jump and land in practice in a game. So I want to make sure we are as robust as possible. I think another thing Daniel said too was, training them for worst case scenario. I mean, there's never something as, or something, about being too strong. Like, it's never a bad thing. And so that is something that I always want to prepare them for. And then also just preparing them for, what do I know our worst practices look like? And what do I know our worst games look like? And what do I know postseason when we've got to play 3 games in 3 days? Like, what do I know those loads look like? And how are we preparing and making sure that we are adequately prepared for that heading into a brutal season?
So when it comes to programming eccentric training, is there any particular methods that you gravitate towards? Does it change throughout the year? Just going to the very end point of adding the exercise into the programming sheet, but what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, it differs. It really does. And I know that it's a gray area, and it is very individual. Our advanced athletes will spend more time in some of the supermax eccentrics. We'll do a little bit more from the accentuated eccentrics and things like that. Whereas, for our novice athletes, it's a little bit more basic and just really focusing on time under tension and tempo. We do a ton of tempo training, and then kind of based on what the athlete's ability is, and from a programming and exercise selection standpoint, it's again kind of what methods do they need. But it really looks different, kind of athlete by athlete. But those are, like I said before, the supermax and the accentuated, like those are two key ones for some of our more advanced athletes. And then again, we incorporate tempos all the time.
Would you have the more experienced athletes doing tempos as well, or is that strictly for
we do.
newer
Yeah,
athletes?
yeah.
Okay.
No, we definitely do. And then as we kind of get into, especially when, I think of when we return in the summer, the beginning of our off season, for the first couple weeks, typically everyone's somewhat similar. Exercises might change a little bit, but everyone's kind of on a similar page as I kind of assess where we're at after a long season and having some time off. And we do a lot of tempo training in those first couple weeks. So there definitely is an element of that involved, and how long we spend in that, again, will kind of differ. And as we kind of we're about a week and a half, 2 weeks as we kind of hit our official practice start date. We, especially in this preseason phase where our time on court increases exponentially, I cut back a lot of what I do, but we do a lot of isometric work kind of in this month of preseason training where we're not playing games yet, but court stress and volume is pretty high, and we still want to get a pretty good training effect, and I found that isometrics are a really great way to continue adaptations, but also do it in a, I guess, less stressful way.
Again, not jumping to the end point, but exercise selection when it comes to isometrics, what does that actually look like in practice for these girls?
Yeah, we do a lot of different single leg variations, so a lot of split squat variations. We'll do some, I would say, any different split squat variations are the key. We've got some that will do, more rear foot elevated. We'll do front foot elevated, just regular. We'll use bands, almost like a Spanish squat variation, but we'll do it in a split squat variation. We will do some wall sits for particular athletes. And then incorporating even, I think of tendon health, knee health, we'll do some different leg extension isometrics at different angles and, different means of doing that. We've got an actual leg extension machine. We'll do some heavy isometrics. We'll use stability ball into the wall. We'll do some band work. Methods kind of change with that, but we'll do some just isometric back squats or front squats or whatever squat variation that they're doing, just being able to hold in the bottom longer durations and, keeping the volume really low. Those are some key ones that we'll use from a lower body standpoint as we kind of transition to a phase where their legs are getting crushed a little bit.
Superb. Well, I know, Molly, you've got the afternoon off, so I want to let you crack on and enjoy yourself. But anyone that wants to get in touch with you or get to know more about you, look at your social media, where's the best place for people to go?
Yeah, I would say social media is probably your best bet, and I'm pretty active on both Instagram and Twitter. Email as well too. My email's on our website. But yeah, Instagram, my handle is mbinetti22. We can put that in writing for
Absolutely.
those that can't spell Binetti. But and then Coach Binetti on Twitter. But both good resources and ways to get a hold of me, and I'll be pretty responsive on those platforms.
Superb. Molly, thank you very much for coming on again, as in first time in the mastermind. It's been a pleasure to chat to you, and I'll let you crack on with your afternoon.
I appreciate it, Rob. Thank you again for having me on. It was a good time.
Likewise. Cheers, Molly. Super.